G'day to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. It's early morning, it's pre-dawn, pre-light. It's been absolutely pouring the past couple of days, and I guess for the first time in a long time I look at the weather maps for the next week, and it looks like every single day is going to be wet and miserable. It's not currently raining, but rain is scheduled and forecast for today, as well as every other day for the next 7 or 8 days, which is interesting. So we're going to have a very, very wet end to summer, and probably cap off one of the wettest summers on record for a while. And it's interesting because it puts everything into perspective, because it's only a couple of years ago that we had one of the driest summers on record, where we had bushfires and devastation, and it appeared that the world was coming to an end. But even then I was crowing and saying that Australia is defined, always has been, always will be, by drought, flood, drought. It's just the natural and normal cycle that we've always had, should I say. We have and will always have. So for those of us who have lived for a number of years, we'll remember that when we were children, it would rain all the time, and it would be dry and droughish for years on end as well. And a lot of these weather patterns, this so-called climate change, is simply just a reflection of El Nino or El Nina, and it's just different weather conditions sparked by different events which happen within the normal cycle of everyday life. And they come in waves, they come in cycles, maybe every couple of years, every 10 years, every 100 years. But there is a pattern, there is a cycle that God knows, and yet scientists have been unable to get their head around, because it's irregular. It's not a typical sort of annual cycle that you could, create a calendar for. It all depends on the variability that occurs throughout the world at a particular point in time. Anyway, today, Monday, or should I say it's Tuesday. I had yesterday off because I had a doctor's appointment. But today's a special day. Actually, it's Wednesday today. What am I talking about? I've lost all the days of the week. Sorry about that. An early form of Alzheimer's kicking in. Today's Wednesday. It's hump day. And I'd like to go through a book summary, a very interesting book summary today, entitled The Nurture Assumption by Judith Harris, which is a book on parenting, and it's a discussion, an open discussion on nurture and nature, and how to bring up children, and what works, what doesn't work, and the biases that we've been brought up with over the years, just to make us aware that there are differences in theories, and to just make up our own mind in terms of what works, what doesn't work, and not to beat us ourselves up over things which are beyond our control. So the author kicks off the book by making a statement, and the statement is that the true classic drivers of human development are nature which are our genes that we're born with, that we've got no real control over, and nurture, which is the environment, the impact the environment has on influencing our behaviours and how we grow up and who we end up being as a person. So the author talks about parenting, talks about childbirth, and said quite specifically in this book, which is a bit of a surprise, but it makes sense when you think about it. And he says that, or she says, that children learn much more from their peers than from their parents. Children learn a lot more from other children within their peer group than what they learn from their parents, which may shock a lot of parents, because a lot of parents seem to think that they are the be-all and end-all for their children and for their children's development. But this author here puts it out there that regardless of how much investment a parent makes in their child, how much quality time, how much they give up in order to give their child, the child will learn much more by playing an hour with their peers and socialising an hour with their peers than what they'll pick up, with a whole day with their mother and father. And it's important to put into perspective, because the author reminds us that parents, people in general, tend to overemphasize the role that parents play in nurture. And up to a certain, time in the history of man, that parental involvement wasn't all that key in scientific discussion or in societal musings, but it seemed to explode at the time when Sigmund Freud started discussing his theories on development and human nature. So it all seems to stem, to a certain extent, from one particular scientist, one particular psychologist, who centered everything on the responsibility of parents and made the suggestion that all the problems that children have come from their parents, or come from traumas that they've had while growing up that were controlled by their parents, teachers, or adults in society. But the author here says that that may not necessarily be true, because children are influenced more and impacted more by other children, and that parents don't have a significant calling or a significant impact on a child's growth and development. And he gives a number of examples. Whilst children may spend all their time with their parents, the kids of immigrants don't necessarily have accents like their parents. And there is a time where we need to release ourselves from taking sides in arguments and start with a blank slate in order to discover the truth. And that is a profound point that the author makes, that the children of immigrants don't speak English like their parents. We take our culture, we take our behaviours, we take our way of seeing the world, our worldview, more from our peers, the kids that we play with, the kids that we grow up with, rather than our parents, which is interesting and quite important to understand, I guess, the importance of children being with children. And I guess it's even more important these days. When I was growing up, I spent a lot of time with other children. I'd go to school, spend the whole day with children. I'd come home, throw my bag on the floor, get on my bike and go to the park and play with children. I didn't spend a lot of time with adults. Yes, I spent some time with adults, but most of my developmental time was spent with other children, with cousins, with friends from school. Given that I was an only child as well, I thirsted and I craved to be with other kids and did whatever I could to get out of the house. And thank God my parents understood that as well and gave me the freedom, just like most kids in the 60s were free to have friendships, to play in the streets and to make sure that they got home at a reasonable time, just before, just after the street lights would come on in the afternoon or early evening. So the other thing that the author makes is that people talk about science, people talk about experiments, people talk about theories, child psychology, but the author says, and it's refreshing to hear a scientist talk about science, and he said that most child psychology is correlational and all they do is look for trends. There are no true experiments done with children. And what we've learnt over time is that child's behaviour is 50% associated with the genes that they have, with the genes that they're born with, the genes that they have no control over, and 50% with their environment. Children all come into the world different. They already come into the world changed because of their genes. And people treat them differently because of their genes, not because of their behaviour. They have different tendencies. They have different talents. They have different abilities. And all of those will reflect and receive the specific attention that those genes have in order to be able to function and to fit in. So children come into the world already different. They're born different. They're born with strengths. They're born with weaknesses. And these genetics have a significant impact on who that person becomes. And it also influences the parenting style and the collaborative and cooperative style that adults and other children around them respond to those genes. So, being a parent and having two children, you learn quite early in life that no two children are ever the same. The two children, even if they're identical twins that come into the world, have differences, and those differences are based on their genes, and the differences slowly but surely change over their lifetime because of the environmental impacts. But it's neither one nor the other. Both are operating in parallel, and both lead a child to a different destination, because no two people will have the same history, the same past. No two people will have the same present, even if they're identical twins. And most certainly no two children, no two people will ever have an identical future. It's interesting to note that identical twins raised in the same house are no more alike than identical twins raised in different homes. Genes, the things that children are born with, the things that children inherit, account for nearly all the differences. The other thing that the author talks about here, which is interesting, is that birth order creates differences and creates a microenvironment. You know, if you're the firstborn in a family, you're going to have different opportunities. You're going to have different relationships with your parents, with other children, because you're going to be the older brother or the older sister. You're going to be the second parent to your siblings. And that order bestows certain, expectations on a child. It allows them to grow and develop in different ways because it creates a different micro environment for that child, but also for others around them. The problems with theories about the environment in terms of nurturing is that any theory in these psychological things, these biological sciences, they can't prove anything and they can't disprove anything because you can't test them. You know, what happens to one child under certain circumstances may be completely different to the impact it would have on another child, so to speak. So once again, it's important to understand that science can get us to a certain point, but it can't teach us everything and it can't explain everything. So it's important, I guess, from a parental perspective, to understand and to look back over your life and to not beat yourself up and to understand that things happen along the way. So the author goes on to say that yes, by all means, nurture is important, but children learn from parents, but not only from their parents. Children tend to gravitate to other children, and that's important. Just like you socialise a dog by allowing it to play with other dogs, so too with children. Children need to be with other children, and children tend to gravitate. This is an important point for those who may think differently, but it's just logical. Children, people, tend to gravitate to others of a similar age, of a similar sex, of a similar race, with children who have got similar values and similar behaviours. So whatever genetic components a child has in its makeup will also lead it to try and associate and create a micro-environment around itself with children who have similar sort of genetic backgrounds. So children, once again, are also influenced significantly by their social groups, by their peer groups, and are influenced and impacted by acceptance or rejection. Social comparison, according to this author, is very, very key, and it's a key part to finding yourself. And culture is normally adopted from your peers rather than from your parents. You know, whilst we think that hanging out with our uncles and aunts and grandparents and parents is going to translate culture, the author here is saying that it is far more likely that a child will receive its cultural stamp, its cultural blueprint from its peers rather than it's from its parents. Because children are not interested in becoming successful adults. A child, in order to survive, in order to thrive, in order to feel good, is only focused on becoming a successful child. And being a successful child is all about fitting in, being accepted, and being similar to the others that the child is with. So the author here reminds us that a 10-year-old child, when a child reaches the age of 10, a parent has very little influence over its peer group or the group that that child wants to associate and to relate to. And there is a status within social groups. And I guess an important call to action for parents is to try and enable their children to look and feel normal and to look and feel attractive within a particular social group that they gravitate to. The other thing that the author says here, which is, I guess, a little controversial, but it may be true as well, that smart babies come from smart parents. It's the genetic makeup, the genetic inheritance that gets handed down through the generations, through the family, that gets passed to the children. And parenting should be easy. The author here makes the point that too many parents get far too involved with their children. A child doesn't thrive on quality time with their parents, with their families. What the author here is saying is that children need quality time with their peers, with children their same age, children the same sex, children the same race, and children that share the same values. Now, this is important. I know there's a lot of parents who try to hijack their children, try to make them mini-me's, but all of that is a waste of time, because sooner or later the child will become who they are going to become. They're not going to be a mini you. Even if you want it, even if you invest lots of time and money, a child wants to be with other children. It doesn't want to be with its mother and father all the time. Yes, there are times that children want to be with their parents, but not all the time. So this is an important call to action for parents who try to, I guess, invest a lot of time and effort with their children. The author here is saying that you're making and you're wasting your time. You're better off having your children socialising with other children and being children rather than them becoming mini adults. So the other thing the author says is that bad children, bad kids, kolopeda, also come from good parents, because you've got no influence over the genetic makeup. You've got little influence over the peer groups. You may have some influence, but sooner or later, a child, because of their genes, because of their makeup, because of their tendencies, their leaning, they're going to continue to want and strive to be with a particular peer group that fulfills them, that makes them feel alive. And a parent, sadly, has no influence over that, even though they may try, even though they think that they can make a difference. At the end of the day, a person's going to be who they're going to be, regardless of the nurture that is offered. So I guess the last point is that we can try and perfect our children by endless effort, but the bottom line is that a child will have its own path, and it's healthy for a child to have its own path. It may be the wrong path, but what we've learnt in life is sooner or later all people find themselves. It may take them till they get to 30. But if a parent spends too much effort and too much time poking their nose and trying to guide their children and control their children, they're going to have probably a worse outcome over time for that child. The last thing you want is for your child to grow up and say to their parent that they need to go and have an urgent operation. And the parent asks the child, what sort of operation do you need to have? Now, what's happened? And the child will tell their parent that I need to go and get your nose surgically removed from my backside. Because children need time and space. They need their own ability to find themselves rather than being distracted by their parents, by their families, by their cultures, trying to push them and guide them onto a path that they may not feel is their calling. Each person is different, as we've said time and time again. We're all going to have a different past, a different present, and a different future. And it's when a parent understands that and leaves it in God's hands, by all means, pray to God, do whatever you can to allow a child to express themselves and be themselves, but don't force them down a particular path which may not be their calling or callings. So thank you very much for joining me on this special episode of Jim's 5am Club. It is Hump Day Wednesday. It's a magnificent time to be alive and well and healthy. I took yesterday off, had a few medical tests that I needed to do. I'll get some results back today and over the next few days. Who knows what those results will be. I feel good, but I'll leave it in God's hands. May God's will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. So take care, everybody. Enjoy your day. Make the most of today, regardless of the weather. And we'll chat again. Bye for now.